Such a cliché. In life, any experience that once seemed fresh or novel can quickly become stale or dull if it is repeated too many times. Of course, the same is true for expressive language. A new phrase or clever comparison can delight or provoke when first encountered, but when the same phrase is used too often, not only does it lose its power, but it can even become irritating to the reader or listener. In English, such phrases or expressions are collectively known as clichés. The origin of the word cliché is an interesting story in itself. The word comes originally from the French verb clichéer, which refers to a printing process called dabbing. In dabbing, a three-dimensional image is pressed into molten metal to produce a reverse image. It is thought that cliché was originally an imitation of the sound made during this process. Because printing was used to repeat an image over and over again, the word cliché eventually became associated with repeated overuse of certain words or ideas. Clichés often involve some kind of striking visual image. For instance, one might describe a person as being a tower of strength or start a novel by saying that it was a dark and stormy night. Although expressions such as these might be slightly more acceptable in common speech, they are generally regarded as a sign of inexperience or a lack of creativity when encountered in writing. As a French writer once observed, the first man who compared woman to a rose was a poet, the second, an imbecile. That being said, good writers can employ clichés in clever ways, often for ironic or humorous effect. But whether a cliché is used well or not, a precise definition of cliché is somewhat difficult to pin down, so to speak, because clichés often overlap with other similar terms such as platitudes, idioms, and proverbs. For example, a platitude is a cliché that is usually employed to offer a moral comment on a certain situation. One might say you shouldn't cry over spilt milk to express the idea that a person should not worry about unfortunate past events that he or she cannot change. On the other hand, it was a dark and stormy night, although certainly a cliché, is not a platitude since it does not contain a moral element. Similarly, it can be challenging to distinguish between the terms idiom and cliché, as the two words are often used interchangeably. Both idioms and clichés are phrases that are used in everyday language. The difference is mainly in how fresh the phrase remains in normal communication. Whereas a cliché is tired and worn, an idiom still retains acceptability in everyday speech. For instance, "he got cold feet" is a common idiom to express nervousness and hesitation before a significant event such as a wedding or business deal, and it would not be considered a cliché by most people. Of course, what one person might regard as an idiom, another might consider to be a cliché. As the saying, or cliché, goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Like language itself, clichés also have the ability to evolve. One interesting offshoot of clichés is known as a snow clone. In essence, a snow clone is an adaptable phrase in which key words of the original cliché can be replaced by other words that are suitable for the topic being discussed. The term itself is based on a cliché that states that the Inuit, the indigenous people living in northern Canada, have more than 100 words for snow. The linguist Geoffrey Pullum noticed that journalists often used various, or clones, of this cliché in their writing. For example, a journals might say the Swiss must have 100 words for chocolate of the government has 100 different words for inefficiency. In other words, journalists were using the clichéd phrase X have more than 100 words for Y in a variety of situations. Another example of a snow clone would be to X or to X, based on Shakespeare's famous line to be or not to be from the play Hamlet. For example, a person who cannot decide whether or not to purchase a particular item might jokingly say, to buy or not to buy, to express his or her indecision.